Welcome to the All About You podcast. My name is Sheila and I am your host. In this podcast, I invite people to tell their stories of their travels, hobbies, and passions. These podcasts are also now available on my All About You YouTube channel. So if you have a story to tell, please contact me on allaboutyoupodcast@yahoo.com and let's tell your story. Welcome to the All About You podcast. And we have a very special guest today. My guest is an executive coach, TEDx speaker, author and podcaster. So I would like to welcome Sue Stockdale to the All About You podcast. Sue, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Sheila. I'm delighted to be here.
And I'm really looking forward to this conversation because I know some of the things you have done, which are amazing. So Sue, as you wear so many different hats, can you please introduce yourself?
Well, I like to think of myself as an adventurer, Sheila. I think that really encompasses everything that I do. So whether I'm coaching a client and helping them to explore their own potential as a leader, whether I'm actually going on an adventure myself, or whether I'm speaking about adventure and inspiring other people to be adventurous, I think that is really the catch-all title for what I'm about.
So where did this love of adventure come from?
Well, I think you have Enid Blyton to blame for that. Her books, The Famous Five and the Secret Seven series, I read when I was young. And I think she made what seemed to be like an ordinary day out with friends and a dog and always sandwiches turn into an amazing adventure. And it really captured my imagination. And I wanted to have adventures like that and to just have fun in the outdoors and discover the wider world around me, really.
I totally relate to that because rather like you, I was brought up on Enid Blyton, Famous Five, Secret Seven. And as a kid, you just wanted to be part of their gang.
Absolutely.
So you grew up with this love of adventure. When did you decide, okay, I've got this love, I'm inquisitive, I actually need to do something about it? What was the catalyst for that?
Well, it was probably an advert on the notice board at work, where I think there was a picture of a person holding a spider in their hand or something like that. And this was an advert for people to participate in an expedition that a charity, which was known as Operation Raleigh in those days, was the company that I worked for were sponsoring 5 employees to go on this expedition. And it meant that you got 3 months off work, you got your salary paid, and you could travel to a remote part of the world and carry out scientific, community and adventure projects. Well, I think it was probably the idea of having 3 months off work and still getting paid that was particularly appealing. And I just thought, wow, how often do you see an advert like that? And I wanted to travel and see more of the world, as I've said. So I applied for that and luckily got selected as one of the company-sponsored employees. And whilst the company paid for my place on the expedition, I still had to raise £1,500, which was quite a lot of money in those days. This was back in 1988, to subsidise then somebody from a less advantaged background to also participate in the expedition. Because I think what part of the challenge of going on an Operation Raleigh expedition, or Raleigh International as it was latterly known, was that you were making a commitment. You had to raise some money to participate. So that's what got me into Kenya, first of all, which I would count really as my first big adventure in another country. And that was back in 1988.
That was definitely right place, right time, and an opportunity. As you say, raising that amount of money back in the day. How did you go about doing that, Sue?
Well, I'm always a great proponent of, if somebody else has done it before, then learn from them. And there had been other company-sponsored employees in previous years who'd done this expedition. So I got in touch with one of those people and found out that they had raised money by doing a plastic duck race. So they got those little yellow ducks that you see in the bath that children play with. They had managed to source 500 of those plastic ducks. And they'd numbered each one from 1 to 500, and then they sold raffle tickets effectively to people could buy a duck, and then the person had put them all into a river, and the ducks had floated down the river, and it was a race, and the first duck that they got past a particular finishing line won the race. So I asked her if I could borrow the ducks, and they were shipped up to me, and I decided to do the same thing because that was something that none of my friends or family had ever come across anything like that in Scotland at the time. So it was quite a novelty, and it attracted people to participate. So that raised over £500, I think it was, or maybe £700. And we got sponsors to contribute prizes. So effectively, it was a big raffle, but it had a bit of fun, and people could come along and watch the duck race taking place. And that raised the majority of the money. And then other things, like the many things that I'm sure lots of your listeners would participate in for fundraising activities, to have an event or something where people would contribute and get some benefit from it.
I mean, that's amazing. Having to raise £1,500, I think, would a lot of people off right at the beginning. So you did this adventure, and then you came back, and were you okay? Fine, I've had my adventure. Okay, I'm just going to get on with normal life. Is that what happened?
Certainly not. I had been working in the finance function of that particular company, which I started as a junior clerical assistant and in the finance function, and that's all I had ever known. But it was fine. I enjoyed it. But I had my eye on the training department, because the training department in the company was based in a manor house, an old manor house across the road from the big office building that I worked in. And it always seemed to be this kind of mystical place. Every time you went there, you had a different sense of calm, and the people that worked there always seemed super friendly. So when I was that finance person, I thought I'd love to work in that training department. So when I came back from the expedition, I had more confidence now. And I thought, well, the company's invested in me. They've paid my salary for 3 months. And so they must think I'm worth something to be able to do this. So I went to the person that was in charge and said, do you know, I'd really like to work in that training department. How can I get a job over there? And I guess perhaps I sounded confident enough for them to even consider that. And a few weeks later, the manager came and said, well, we've managed to find a job for you over there, but you will have to commit to doing it for at least a year. And this was a job doing IT training. Now, back in the late 80s, early 90s, this was when email was a new thing. People doing their own word processing was a novelty. And I must admit, it didn't particularly appeal to me, first of all, because I wanted to do more of the management development, the barrels and planks, the outdoor activities that sort of were part of the training cohort as well. But, I think it was the best decision that manager ever made, because, of course, I learned at the forefront of technology, which is so prevalent in our lives today. I was there at the start, learning about it myself, and then training other people how to use this technology. And I got to stay and work in that manor house, and it was a fantastic experience. So I think that first adventure gave me a sense of more of my value and my worth in the workplace. It gave me a sense of confidence, and it gave me a sense of direction to go after what I really wanted, as opposed to wait for life to happen to me. So that was quite a turning point after that adventure. It took me into another adventure in the workplace.
I think the interesting thing there, Sue, I know you do a lot of coaching with people. We never think our abilities and skills are valuable. We just don't. We accept that we can do something. Well, everybody can do that. Everybody can't do that, but we don't give ourselves credit. And the second thing I wanted to come upon is you came back from that first adventure. Okay, I've now grown in confidence. I want to do something else. And many people do not get the opportunity to do your adventure. And we're going to go on to your other ventures in a second. But you came back with renewed confidence, and that has led to so many different things. And we're naturally, as humans, we just want to stay in our little comfortable, cozy bubble. I'm exactly like that, and most people are. It takes someone incredibly special to start poking a hole in that bubble, poke, poke, poke. Then eventually it bursts and it's like, okay, now I've got to step up to the plate. I know you're going to talk about that in a bit. You've got your ideal job. And as you say, you were right at the beginning of the email and the technical revolution. What happened next, Sue?
Well, I continued working in that company and went for another job that took me to London. So I was able to move to another country, effectively down to England. So that was an adventure in itself. And I was still developing and growing. Somehow I think the call of something completely unknown again was really at the heart of what was driving me. And so again, unexpectedly, I was reading the newspaper one day and another advert caught my attention in the paper. And it was for a job that was working with the United Nations in the former Yugoslavia. Now, this was back in 1994, and you may remember there was a civil war on in the country. So effectively, this was a civilian job working in a war zone. Now, I'm sure most people would have looked at that advert and thought, no thanks, because we all saw the atrocities on the news in Sarajevo, etc. at that time. It kind of appealed to me, and I just sent off my CV. I didn't really give it much thought nor prepare my CV in any special way. Anyway, a few weeks later, a letter came back and said, yes, we'd like to effectively offer you the job subject to interview, which was quite amazing. And so the long and the short of it was I was then left with a decision to leave this corporate career that I had had for 11 years and go and work on a 1-year contract, not even a permanent job, in a war zone, or to stay in my comfortable corporate land. And at those sort of pivotal moments in my life, and that was probably the first major one, when you've got to make a big decision, there's obviously the head, the logic that you might use to logically work out if it's a good or a bad decision. And then there's this thing that we all have, gut feel or intuition. And I don't think sometimes we give it enough credence. I've certainly learned to trust it a whole lot more than I did then. But it probably was the first time that I did really listen to my intuition. And my gut feel said, go for it. Well, I also went to my boss, who I had a good relationship with in the workplace. And I said to him, here, I've been offered this job. What do you think? Now, I don't think he wanted to get rid of me. I think I was a good employee. So he gave me his honest opinion. And he said, knowing you, Sue, I just don't think you'll be here to get your gold watch after 25 years of service. He said, so if this is the thing that, appeals to you, then, maybe you need to go for it. And that was probably a very useful wisdom from a manager. And so I listened to him and I listened to my gut feel and I jumped and I left the company and went off into the former Yugoslavia for that 1 year, which was an amazing experience.
Wow, just wow. But your boss obviously could see you weren't the type of person who's just going to sit behind a computer until retirement. So the job was successful, I should imagine very stressful, very challenging, but you did it. What happened when you came back?
Well, I came back after that year, and sadly during that time, I had been married during that time. My husband didn't come with me. I came back, and for many, very reasons, we decided we would get divorced. So I was in this situation of feeling sad about that, that the breakup of our marriage. I wasn't sure what to go on to next because I didn't have a job to come back to. But I had been studying remotely for a master's degree in quality management while I was working abroad. So the university that I was studying with in England allowed me to study abroad and fly back to take the exams. So I decided that I would continue on with that study and accelerate the learning. So rather than do it over 3 years, I did it over 2 years. So I thought I'll come back and I'll be a student. And the house that I was living in, which was then going to be put up for sale, had a few extra bedrooms. So we were living near the university. So I rented the rooms out to students and I became a student myself. And we were all living in the house during that time, which enabled me to sustain myself financially. And during that time of studying, there was another advert that I love reading the newspaper. And it's amazing how these opportunities appear. And I think they are all around us all the time. It's about, are we alert to them when we're reading a newspaper? And this advert said, wanted 10 novice Arctic explorers. Now, how often do you see an advert like that? two qualifications that they were looking for: the ability to work in a team, and I knew how to do that from my workplace, and the ability to raise £15,000 to pay for your place. Well, I mean, I think I could have bought my house for that amount of money at the time. And I had no idea how I would do that. And to be honest, I read the article and then I put the paper down and I left it. And then at the end of the evening, I went back to it and I thought, oh, there's something about that. Why don't I just apply for that and see what happens? So I sent off for the details and the brochure came back, a lovely brightly coloured brochure, all featuring pictures of men. And on the front it said, are you man enough for the ultimate challenge? Now, Sheila, I don't know if you're like me, but that was like a red rag to a bull. And I thought, they don't think women are going to get on this. I'm going to prove them wrong. And that's why I sent off for the application, still not knowing how I'd raise the money. My mindset at that stage was, if it's meant to be, I'll find a way. So I always think that, and I'm kind of just relating this more broadly, is that when we have got to burst through that bubble out of our comfort zone, sometimes we think that the first step to take is a huge step and it just puts us off. So I'm really a great proponent of breaking down the first step to make it small enough that it's kind of inconsequential if you do it. There's not a big risk if you take that. And so for me, filling in that application form, okay, I didn't know how to raise the money, but I could still fill in the form and send it off. So the small first step was achievable enough that I just take it and then I'll see what happens next. And then you take the next step and see what happens next. And that's eventually what happened. The steps were a whole lot of selection tests that everybody had to go through. I think over 500 people applied, and a group of us were whittled down till eventually there was 10 of us left that were picked. 8 men and 2 women, myself and a Swedish woman, Susanna. And that was the team of novices to be led by 4 experienced explorers and go off to the magnetic North Pole.
Again, I'm speechless, Sue, and I knew I would be in this. There are so many pearls of wisdom in what you've just said. Any goal, it looks absolutely huge and you just think there is no way. Once you start breaking down individual, very small steps, which in their own, are not a great leap, but each little one adds up and adds up and adds up, and it builds. And as you get comfortable with doing different things to take you to your goal, you are one of 2 women and 8 men plus the leaders that are taking you. How did you prepare mentally and physically for this? Because you are leaving, in theory, the comfort of your world. You're quite happy with what you're doing, and you going off to somewhere where a majority of people will never see apart from on TV and film.
Well, one of the wonderful things that we did to prepare, well, it was both mentally and physically, was to go to the meat market at Smithfield in London into one of the huge freezers that normally contains all the meat. And the organisers of the expedition had requested it. The temperature was set to -20°C, which would be about the temperature we would experience in the Arctic. And we were to go in and simulate, imagine what it would be like. So we took in our tents and we took in our sledges and we took in all our warm clothing. And we walked in our street clothes, in our normal day clothes. And of course, the temperature hits you. It is just like stepping into a freezer. And then we went back out, we put on all our warm clothes and went back in again. And then we practiced pitching our tent and trying to light the stove. Now, what I quickly realised was that all the time in the Arctic, of course, you have to wear gloves because your hands can't, of course, if you touch anything metal, they would stick to the metal. And of course, it's very cold. So doing an activity, a simple activity like pitching a tent in nice British weather is fine. At -20, it's a whole different experience. So it really brought home to me, am I really going to be in this for a month and survive? And it didn't put me off. It just made it very clear the reality that I was going to be facing. So that was a good simulation of the environment. Preparing physically, David Hempleman Adams, who was our expedition leader, who's a very well-known polar explorer, David said to us, get fit, do endurance training so that you can drag your sledge, of course, repeatedly day after day. You'll need to be fit for that. But don't specifically train any particular muscles, because when you get out there, the reality might be quite different. So if you're training have really strong shoulder muscles or back or something, then it might be different. I, at that point, Sheila, was training every day anyway. I used to compete competitively in athletics. In fact, I represented Scotland in 3,000 metres and cross country. So I was competing at a high level. And therefore, I was doing rigorous training every single day. I just continued on to do that. So I didn't particularly do anything special. In hindsight now, having done the expedition, I would say that physical fitness is not the most important thing. The most important thing is mental fitness, is the belief that you can keep going when the going gets tough. And that's then back to this small steps analogy that I was talking about earlier. When we were out in the Arctic, and I'm fast forwarding onto the journey itself now, there were days where I just thought I couldn't go on. I was physically and mentally exhausted. But you can't give up. No one's going to come and rescue you. You're in the middle of the Arctic. So I just said to myself, well, let's just focus on the next 5 minutes. See if I can just get through the next 5 minutes. And I did. And then I'd say, okay, I did that. So if I can do that, I can do the next 5 minutes. And I would do the next 5 minutes and then the next 5 minutes and so on. So it was the same idea of having a big challenge that you think is impossible, breaking it down into small enough achievable steps and just focusing on them. Let everything else go. Don't think about, yeah, but what about in 3 hours' time? Forget about that. I just always focused on the next thing in hand. And somehow then at the end of the day, you get through it and you've covered so many miles.
That again can be used for so many things, isn't it? Just focus on what's the one thing you can do now. Don't worry about the other 27 steps. What's the one thing you can do now? Do that. When you've done that, go on to the next one. This is what makes the difference. And my husband, he's an ex-athlete as well. And he always says, you can always do more than you think you can. And as you said, just get through the next 5 minutes. I've done that, right, I can get through the next 5 minutes, as opposed to looking at the 300 miles ahead or the next 14 days or whatever.
Yeah, it is applicable in all walks of life. There's one other small point I would just add into what you were reflecting on there, Sheila, and it is this point of reflection. So it's about taking those small steps and also taking time to reflect in between each one. So, what have I accomplished? What do I need to change or do differently for the next step or the next 5 minutes? So sometimes I've seen people who are very action orientated, so they can take a lot of action, but they're not actually heading in the direction that they want to head in. So they're, for example, busy but not efficient. And I've seen that in the workplace. So there is a place, I believe, to also make sure you take time for that reflection and thinking before the next step.
And I think that's very much ties into, okay, let's focus on the next 5 minutes, which if we look as sort of, the magnifying glass, and then whatever we're trying to accomplish, let's take a step back. Let's look at the big picture. Okay, let's see where I started. I've done all these small steps. Well, it didn't feel much at the time, but I feel I've got this, and this done. So as you say, it's looking at it, the next 5 minutes, and then take a step back. And you may change that bigger picture because of what's happened on those small steps.
Absolutely. And therefore it gives you that chance to think and, as you say, take the broader perspective while you're in the detail at the same time. So, and doing that reflection gives you motivation. If you've taken 7 steps and it wasn't too difficult, or it was hard, but you've taken 7 steps, reflecting on that gives you motivation, the motive for action. That's the energy that you have to continue on. So it is an important part of the process as well.
And I think particularly when you are a beginner at something, I'm just starting learning watercolour painting. So I'm looking at all these videos and I've just bought myself a very tiny basic kit. And one of the main things is, okay, the people who've done these wonderful watercolour paintings, the best thing is just sit down and play. Just change the amount of water, change the brushes, mix the colours, play. And I thought, hang on a sec, I'm an adult. But it is so true. I'm learning so much by just sitting down for 10 minutes and playing. We are not very good at being a beginner and making mistakes. We expect to go through our 27 steps on how to do something, boom, boom, boom. It doesn't happen like that. So look at the very small steps, break it down, focus on that 5 minutes, but then take a step back, congratulate yourself on what you've accomplished and also what you've learned, because what you've learned may mean you're going to change something in the path ahead. So Sue, you had 8 men and 2 women. Obviously, you got to know each other through the training process. Sue, can you tell us about an average day? There may not even have been an average day, but what was your experience during the day on this trek?
Yeah, well, every day was very average, Sheila. It can be a bit mundane. You're just skiing hour after hour, day after day, and it's all white around you. So, it's not always that exciting. Nevertheless, each day, imagine in your tent, it's 24-hour daylight. So we're skiing in the springtime, it's never getting dark. So when we did wake up, and I would always wear my balaclava over my eyes to give myself a bit of darkness to be able to sleep, there were 4 of us sharing a tent. So there were a few tents out on the ice. We would wake up and then have our breakfast. Now that's not like switching on a kettle in your house and making a cup of tea. You're obviously melting snow to give you the water to then have porridge or a hot drink or whatever. So the whole process of breakfast can take a couple of hours. Then you have to take your tent down, pack your sledge, and then begin to ski. Now we're skiing with cross-country skis. So the front of your boots are clipped in to the skis and your heels are able to move around. And there are what's known as fish skins. It's not actual fish skin, but a material on the bottom of your skis to give you traction. So it will enable you to glide forward but not slide backwards. We were dragging a sledge weighing the weight of an average person, about 50 kilograms or more. And you're doing that in single file because it's safer to ski across the ice in single file. Now it's not flat, the ice isn't flat. If you looked at a building site and there was lots of big bits of rubble, if you were back in your home country, the ice can often be like that as well, because you're skiing on frozen Arctic ocean, and the ocean currents cause the ice to move and to break up. So you can imagine these big lumps of ice all around you, and you have to find your way across these ice blocks to go forwards. So it's quite a slow process. Nevertheless, during that time, we would ski always for about an hour and have a 5-minute break for a hot drink and something to eat, a chocolate bar, energy bar, something like that. And then ski for another hour, have another 5-minute break. And that was the process for the whole day. 1 hour, 5-minute break, 1 hour, 5-minute break. And the reason we don't stop for longer, of course, is you're going to get cold. And that process would maybe last 8, 9, even 10 hours a day. And then eventually, when you decide that everyone's going to stop, you then have to pitch your tent as a group of 4 of you, and then repeat the whole process of making your food, which is dehydrated, high energy meal. You have to melt your snow for that, of course, and make your meal. So that can take you another couple of hours just to have your food in the evening. And then you go to sleep, and then you wake up and do the same thing again the next day. So it's a bit boring sometimes, but hard work.
One of the things I was thinking when you were talking about that routine, you're in single file, so you're not sort of skiing along chatting. You're not skiing along listening to something on your AirPods. What do you think about, Sue? I mean, I don't know. I mean, here in Spain, people do the Camino, the various walks there. It's a very spiritual thing, and people reflect on their life. They think about decisions, think about their future. Everybody comes back and say you get clarity of thinking. What did you think about?
Or my most enjoyable thought or topic of thought was food. Because I love eating, and thinking about food kind of gets me excited to think about the flavors and the tastes of particular things to eat. And of course, in the Arctic, we're only eating dehydrated food, so it's pretty bland. So the idea of it conjuring up in my mind the thought of the flavor of something flavorful like cheese, strong cheese, or some bacon, it's often the things that have a strong flavor that I would evoke in my imagination. And then after a while, I thought, oh, come on, Sue, there's more. This is a bit lowbrow to be thinking about food. Come on, think about something more worthy. So I turned my attention to reflecting on friends that I hadn't seen for a while. And I would think about that friend and recall the last time I had met them, which was normally in a restaurant or a bar. And then I could vividly tell you what either they or me had had to eat in that meal. And it always came back to food. So I just said, okay, just let your brain go where it wants to go. And yeah, it is a wonderful experience. I mean, some people might think that's quite scary, alone with your thoughts for 30 days. What might you discover? It almost becomes a meditative process because you're just kind of concentrating on this plod of the skiing steps and just being in nature. There's no sound, so there's complete silence apart from the swish of your skis. You know, I almost would say I couldn't tell you what I thought about half the time, apart from the food. It was just allowing space. And that is a privilege. We don't give ourselves space, getting away from noise, sound, and so on. So I'm going off to Jordan in a couple of weeks' time on another trek with some camels. And that is one of the things I'm really looking forward to, is silence and space and expanse, and just see what comes into my head.
Because if we go back to your expedition trek here, you've got the physical side, which obviously you had to prepare for. Did you get much guidance and help regarding the mental aspect of 30 days? Basically, everything is white, you're on your own, single file. Did you get much guidance on how to cope with that?
We got no guidance on that at all. We did a psychometric test as part of our selection process. So if we'd been mentally unstable, I think the processes would have weeded that out and probably wouldn't have gotten the team. We didn't talk about how to manage our mental state. What we did do was we spent quite a lot of time as a team getting to know one another before we went out onto the ice. And one activity that I vividly recall is our what if exercise. So we all got together and we wrote down our fears and our concerns. What if I fall through the ice? What if I can't stand my teammates? What if somebody gets ill? You know, the things that go through our mind that can blow up out of all proportions when we feel fearful. And then we read out all our what ifs and shared them with everybody else. And what that allowed me to realise was that everybody pretty much had the same fears and concerns, and that once we'd voiced them, they weren't big in our minds any longer. They were out there, and we didn't find resolutions to them all, but somehow by naming them, they didn't seem so scary. Now, that wasn't billed as a standard team building exercise, and this is the purpose of it, but in some small way that helped to build our camaraderie, our resilience, and our trust in one another. And it's those things that are going to be the glue that keeps a team together during the tough times, when you know that pretty much other people have got the same fears and concerns as you have.
I love the what if exercise. I'm just thinking there is no reason we can't use that in our daily life. And you know, particularly we're going through a financial crisis in all countries at the moment, but it's what if so and so happens? Okay, well, I would phone this person, I would, you know, get this, you know, my insurance documents, That's a great exercise to do. Just sit down with a cup of coffee, pen and paper, what if, list a few things down, and even if you just do a couple of points for the first one, it gets you thinking. And as you say, the problem doesn't seem so scary if you think, okay, this is what I know I would do.
Well, there is another side to that coin, Sheila, because I think sometimes when we have a fear and anxiety, we can allow that what if to, as I would call it, catastrophize. Some people can go oh, what if this, and what if that, and what if the next thing, and what if the next thing, and then they then get so overwhelmed by all the fear, then they have an inability to take any sort of action. So against the what if exercise, there's also the mindset of trusting yourself. And I think that that's another part that I didn't maybe, you know, overtly voice, was to say, I've got this, we've got this in our team. So no, yes, we have these fears and concerns, but at the heart, I trust myself to be okay, and I trust these people to look after me. And I think it's when others, and I've been in this situation myself sometimes, when we catastrophize about, oh my goodness, what if this, what if that, what's the next thing? We allow the emotion to overwhelm us, is to forget then the bit about actually, no, let's remember, you've been in that situation before, how have you got through it? So we've got to manage the emotion sufficiently, we get back into our thinking brain and remind ourselves of the strengths that you talked about right at the start. When we know our strengths, we know what we're good at, we know what we've achieved in the past, drawing upon that can help us have confidence for the future.
You've done 30 days trekking, a group of 10 with the group leaders. When in theory you got to the end, wherever that end, how was the end? Was it you got to a certain point, somebody whipped out a canvas and said, right, we've done it? What was it like getting to the end, and how did you know it was the end?
Great question. Well, it was exactly like you described. The person had we had a GPS, or like you have in your car, your sat nav. In those days, and even today, it's too cold to have it switched on all the time. So we switched it on that day because we knew we were at the end. We watched the numbers totting up, telling us that we would get to the magnetic North Pole, which is just a point on the Earth's land. That's where all the magnetic fields come into at the top of the world. The scientists that track the location give you the reference where that is. So that's what we were heading for. And we were all skiing along in single file. The person at the front had the GPS. And then all of a sudden they stop and say, we've made it. And then it's a bit like dominoes. Everybody, of course, abruptly stops behind them so quickly that we all almost fell over in a big heap. It's like, oh my goodness, right, we're here. And it doesn't look any different to any other white piece of ice anywhere around you. So you've been skiing for 30 days. Heading towards somewhere, and then all of a sudden just somebody shouts, right, stop, we've got there. And it is so much of an anticlimax. And what I realized at that point, it isn't about getting to that point that was the important thing. It was the journey that we'd had together, you know, all the highs, the lows, the people I'd got to know so well and trusted. That was what was really about it. It was just an icing on the cake to get to the point of saying we're at the magnetic North Pole.
So how did you feel yourself? Did you sort of pat yourself on the back and go, well done, Sue? What did you do? What was your reaction?
Yeah, I think I was proud that I'd achieved it, and as an accolade, and it wasn't the reason I did it. I became the first British woman to get there. So that was a lovely a sense of, I guess, the achievement of what had been accomplished. What I also felt was a tinge of sadness, because we'd built up such a strong bond together that I knew that when the plane came to pick us up, which is what was going to happen, a small plane would come and land to collect us, that bubble that we had created together of camaraderie was going to be burst when other people came into the environment, and that world would change. And that was probably what I was most sad about. But of course, that's reality. You know, everything has to come to an end.
Once you all got on the plane, was it just everyone was in complete silence? Because it must have been a complete change to the environment you had been, you know, you'd been left, right for sort of 30 days. All of a sudden you're in a plane, you've completed what you set out to do. What was it like? Was it dead quiet on that plane, or was everyone just exhausted and couldn't speak?
It was a very buoyant atmosphere. When the plane arrived, it brought with it two people. Well, it brought two of our support team who'd been at base camp, so they flew out to see us. And it also brought one of our major sponsors and his wife. Now, this sponsor is the owner of a very luxury Swiss watch brand. So he was a major sponsor. He wanted to come to the North Pole and have photographs with his wife. So that's all wonderful. Now, then imagine we're in a small plane where the heating is on, of course, and you're now got 16 people who haven't washed for a month in warm temperatures. It made us laugh so much to just look at their faces, to perhaps think that, yes, the price of paying of getting to the North Pole was to then sit in this plane for 3.5 hours and fly back to base camp. But they did bring with them some, I think they brought a bottle of champagne or something. So we had a little bit of refreshment to celebrate. So you can imagine there was lots, you know, it perked us up no end. And there was just lots of conversation and chatter. And yeah, that was a funny bit about it, with the having not washed for a month. We were all looking forward to getting back for a hot shower.
when you actually came back to sort of your real life, so you sort of put the key in your front door, sort of dumped your bag in the hall, what did you do then? I mean, I can't imagine what you would do, but what did you do?
Yeah, it was a little surreal. And it is amazing though how quickly we adapt. It was probably thinking about, oh, better buy food for my dinner or get to the shops or something like that. I think what I did realize later after that expedition is I hadn't planned the what next. So there was a big low after that tremendous high of the North Pole success. Coming back and having nothing to focus on, I was still in the process of selling my house. I didn't have a job. I was finishing my studies and so on. It was a bit like a black hole in the future for me. Like what is next? And I had to fall back on my step-by-step approach and just think, okay, get the house sold, think about where I live, what I'm going to do next. And I did hit a bit of a low after that, to be honest. And after about 3 months, I think it was, of sort of waiting for people to come and give things to me or offer me jobs or help me, because there's a lot of press coverage, we got a lot of attention. I sat back and I was waiting for other people to help me. Of course, they didn't. And then I realized that sometimes when we're in that dark place, the only person that can help you is you. And I'm going to have to be the one that gets out and does something. So I contacted that charity I mentioned earlier, Raleigh International, because they always need volunteer members of staff to help on their expeditions. And I thought, well, maybe if I could go on another expedition, but as a leader, and maybe helping other young people to have that expedition experience, maybe my skills will be put to good use. Maybe I'll feel of worth again, that I can contribute in some way to helping others. And so I contacted them, and would you believe that they said, well, yes, we do have a position. We're looking for a volunteer deputy expedition leader to head to Chile to lead an expedition down there, but you need to be able to go in 3 weeks' time. So I said, yes, I can do that. And that's what I did. I headed off to southern Chile, and in some way that gave me a lot of confidence back, because there was me putting my leadership skills to good use, helping other people to get that sense of adventure, that kind of Enid Blyton experience in a foreign country, and to have the responsibility to lead these 120 young people on this expedition. And it was only through going down on that expedition, giving back, if you like, to actually get benefit myself, was I then got a letter from my sister. She wrote to me, and she was talking about an expedition that was happening in Antarctica that Robert Swan, a famous explorer, was organising in January of the following year. And this was in the November. And she said, well, I think you're too old for this now, Sue, because you had to be under 24, but I thought you'd like to know about it. Well, there's me always looking for opportunities. And I thought, well, if they have all these young people, Robert was taking a lot of young people down to Antarctica, surely he needs people to help. And here I am, oh, is that Antarctica? I'm in southern Chile. So I contacted Robert. I didn't know who he was. I didn't have his contact details. I found them out. And I wrote to him and said, can I get involved in some way? I'm almost in Antarctica. And the long story short, I got a message back a few weeks later to say yes. So then from Chile, I then went straight on down to Antarctica and led an expedition along with Robert and his team there for another few months. So I think what I'm hopefully giving you the sense of here, Sheila, is very much opportunistic. Follow a thread, look at a possibility and take the first step. And you just don't know what possibilities are out there, but you've got to be willing to take that first step. And that's the thing I've learned throughout my life.
I'm just thinking back to how we started this conversation. When you were working in an office, there was a notice on the notice board. From that one notice that you may not have even seen, it may not even have gone up on that notice board in your office, look where that has taken you.
Yes, and I would say that is the journey of life for any of us, is sometimes taking opportunities and take one step and see what happens. That's my mantra for life. As I mentioned at the outset, I view my role and my job as an adventurer. And an adventurer has got to be prepared to go into the unknown. You've got to be prepared to fail and to learn from it and to still get up and take the next step, in the innate belief that there is kind of a bigger purpose to it. And that's what I see my bigger purpose is in sharing my journey. And thank you for the privilege of having the conversation today. In sharing my journey with other people, they get a little bit of inspiration, and then they want to take their next step into their unknown. And that ripple effect then spreads out across the world. And so for the last 25 years since that expedition, that's what I've spent my life doing, because that's what I think my purpose is.
You're an author now. Let's talk about you writing the book, Sue. When did you squeeze in writing the book? Did you keep a diary when you were on the expedition at all, or you did?
Yes, I did keep a diary. And I've written quite a number of books. I think I've written 7 or 8 books on business related topics. And I was sitting with my literary agent, as we often do, and sort of say, right, okay, what's the next book idea? And I was prattling on about something, and she said, Sue, why don't you write about you? I think it's about time. After 20 years, I really think you should write about you. I'm sure you've got a lot to say. And for once, I allowed that thought to seep into my mind. And I thought maybe now is the time that I'm ready to write what effectively is, my memoir. And so last year I did that. I just spent some time, and I had the diary notes, and I often speak about the adventures and the expeditions anyway. So a lot of the material is still in my mind. So I produced the book with this principle that we can all take small steps to explore our potential. So I call it a mix of memoir and message. The book's called Explore, A Life of Adventure. Hope that the readers might then be inspired to think about how their life can be a little bit more adventurous if they take a step into the unknown. And it's about all these different expeditions we've been talking about.
This conversation, Sue, I think has got so many parts. We've talked about your experience of doing the expedition. However, there is so much life advice from what you're saying. I've been listening, what you've been saying. Oh, that's going to be the title of the podcast. Oh, no, that's going to be the title of the podcast, because there are so many gems in there.
Thank you, Sheila. I'm glad you've enjoyed what I've been talking about.
When I contacted you, I thought, how can I not get this lovely lady doing this incredible expedition on the podcast? So, Sue, thank you so much for saying yes. We had a brief conversation to set up the podcast, and I said, no, don't tell me anything. I want to hear the whole story in context. Sue, it's been amazing. It's been an absolute pleasure. Wow, thank you.
Well, thank you, Sheila. And I hope that if any one of your listeners is inspired to take their small step and do something and take them into the unknown and explore their own possibilities, that for me will be even more worthwhile.
And just before we finish, Sue, you're talking about you're going off on another expedition.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that one?
Yes, heading off into the desert, the Wadi Rum Desert in Jordan in a couple of weeks' time to do a trek, what I call old school, out into the desert with the Bedouin tribesmen and their camels, and camping out on the sand under the stars, experiencing effectively life as the Bedouin have experienced it for hundreds of years.
So possibly keeping a diary of this trip?
Yes. My husband's coming, and we've also got an adventure photographer coming with us as well. So she hopefully will get some amazing photographs for us and imagery, and then no doubt it will turn into a talk like many of my other adventures have as well.
And hopefully into a book?
Yes, perhaps, or at least part of a book. So yeah, I haven't been to too many hot places, so the desert will certainly be different from the Arctic desert.
So you're going to need to pack different clothing this time.
A lot lighter, yes.
Exactly. So, Sue, can I be really cheeky and say to you, at some point when you've recovered from the latest expedition, I would love you to come back and talk about that one.
Oh, I'd be delighted to do that, Sheila. Thank you.
Oh, that would be fantastic. So I've got all the information about your book, your TED Talks, your own website. I'll put all the links to the podcast with everything together. Sue, thank you. God, I feel a little bit taller just listening to you.
Well, thank you, Sheila. It's been a great pleasure, and I've enjoyed sharing some of my experiences with you and your listeners.
And the All About You podcast wishes you lots of good luck and plans going as they should be on your next expedition. And we look forward to you coming back later in the year and bringing us up to date with what you've been doing.
Thank you, Sheila.
I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please subscribe on whatever platform you are using. It is free, and if you would like to tell your story, please contact me on allaboutyoupodcast@yahoo.com and let's tell your story.